When it comes to AI, most of us think that scaling AI is just about buying more GPUs. But the real bottleneck is orchestration. Enterprises struggle to stitch together complex hardware and software into unified AI factories. It drains resources and stalls innovation before it even begins. To solve that, IREN is acquiring Mirantis to combine massive compute power they have with deep cloud native expertise that Mirantis has. And today we have with us once again Alex Freedland, CEO of Mirantis, to unpack what this means for the future of AI infrastructure. Alex, first of all, it's great to have you back on the show.
Well, great to be here.
It's my pleasure. Of course, we have been covering Mirantis from very, very early. I even forgot how many decades ago it was. Talk a bit about what specific market dynamics make this the right time for you folks to join hands with IREN and be acquired by them.
The market dynamics is an echo of what put Mirantis on the big stage in the first place. In 2011, when we focused on OpenStack and people learned about who Mirantis was, the market was kind of doing a similar dynamic. The cloud, the first generation of cloud, was moving from hosting to cloud, right? And if you remember, in the early days of cloud, the people like Rackspace and a bunch of others, they were in a leasing business. They would go and put servers in cages and then would essentially lease those servers to people. And that's what service providers did. And then, of course, AWS came in and they kind of pioneered the idea of a cloud, which became self-service, orchestration, and all of that. And the market moved from hosting to cloud when people understood that this is required for efficiency. So a very, very similar thing is happening right now, where the world of AI started with massive training grounds, right? So, to kind of get AI to do something useful, you first needed to train the models. And so for the first year or a couple of years, what was necessary was big foundational model companies, would come in, they lease large bare metal clusters, and they put their training runs on that to train ChatGPTs and all the other foundational models. And then as those models, be it foundational models or smaller models or open source models, have become useful, inference became a thing. And as inference is becoming a thing, and you now need to run your inference workloads, and they're bursty by definition. Some need to be adjusted this way. They need the right amount of hardware, and then you need to do fine tuning, and you have multiple generations of hardware which all work together. Suddenly the world woke up to the fact that hosting is no longer interesting. You actually need to have a self-service cloud. And that is kind of the time of the market that we are now at. And like you said, orchestration is basically an essential element of what is required for an AI factory to be able to service real bursty inference workloads.
Even sometime I have also asked this question in the past that, hey, how do we look at Mirantis? Because I've been covering for so long and you keep evolving with where the market is. Many people still associate Mirantis strictly with Kubernetes and OpenStack. What does this deal signal about your future directions and where the broader AI infrastructure market is heading? Because these days, everything is about AI. We have moved past all the infrastructure. The most important thing is to put that in people's hands, make it cheaper, make it affordable, make it more powerful, and of course, make sure it doesn't hallucinate. But let's talk about how should we look at Mirantis now?
Well, Mirantis has always tried to focus on where the market is going, like you said, right? And we pivoted into OpenStack because we understood that, the compute now is becoming a cloud, and we went where the demand was, and we came up with OpenStack as a vehicle, and we became the winner of that game, right? Then compute evolved from virtual machines to containers, and we did a Docker acquisition, and we became relevant in the container world while being true to our IaaS roots, right? As that happened and as that evolved, AI became first and foremost the workload, right? Now, because of the models, you can create a workload that has a lot more power to change the world, right? And so as a result, the demand for compute is gone through the roof, and it pushes with it, storage and networking as well. And so Mirantis, of course, is there to serve that overwhelming demand, and we are positioned probably the best in the industry today with this acquisition to become a major player in that. But when you think about this, when you have a workload that requires a lot of compute, this workload is not just a model. And this workload has a lot that's going on that. There are agentic things that will be running and calling that models. There'll be databases. There'll be regular traditional compute things. I mean, you've seen Intel and AMD becoming, going to all-time high, because now that we're seeing agentic workloads being adopted using GPU infrastructure, the traditional compute is being pooled in spades, right? Intel is an all-time high. In fact, there was a funny article saying that 51% of all the NVIDIA investments is now Intel, because they invested $5 billion to kind of help the company. Now that $5 billion is worth, more than $25 billion, right? Why? Because the accelerated computing demand is pooling all the other compute. Right? And now that we're moving from bare metal to full stack, suddenly IaaS is so important. Why is NVIDIA suddenly got so close to Mirantis? Is it because Mirantis is, a company that can pull NVIDIA? No, because Mirantis is the only company out there that actually kept our IaaS business, because when private cloud kind of stopped being a thing, everybody went to hyperscalers and all that. Mirantis was there, still kept our OpenStack business, and had a very significant understanding how to build the IaaS, which nobody else did. Now, Red Hat is kind of slowly coming back to that. They reinstated their OpenStack business, and they're doing this, but we're 50 times more nimble than $6 billion Red Hat, right? So we were able to kind of out-execute because of that layer of the stack. And then all the infrastructure orchestration is still done by Kubernetes, right? So Kubernetes as a service is equally as important, and we have that. Now, there are many companies that are doing Kubernetes, and that's still relevant, right? Now, you can run models on top of that, and we need to invest at the top of the stack. But in the end, AI doesn't change the fundamentals of the full compute stack. You need all of the IaaS, you need all of the Kubernetes, and we're doing that in spades. Now, another thing that happened to us is we do have 1,500 enterprise customers, big and small. And that was one of the things that, again, IREN is interested in, because they need to go back. These are the end customers they're going to be selling to. So today, many of those customers are enterprises. They're experimenting with AI on top of ChatGPT and all those other things. But as they scale, they will need to consume their own infrastructure. They'll lease it from everywhere it's going to be available. And they're modernizing their infrastructure to be AI ready, because that's where the world is going. So if you look at our traditional business, which we call core, right, we're actually, everything we're learning from our Cordant experience, Cordant AI, is flowing into our MKE platform. And that is slowly being implemented into our customers, and then our customers get everything we learn from service providers. So that's a natural progression of how we do things. It's just, everything is going in the same direction. The only difference is, for some, future is today, for some, future is tomorrow, and some for future is day after tomorrow. And if you look at how we're building our business, we're going to our customers exactly where they are. For those who are moving slower and they need traditional compute, we're helping them to modernize so they can run AI in 2 years. For those who need AI experimentation, we already run those experimentations, and Cordant is working together with MKE and everything else. And for those who need it yesterday, which are neoclouds and service providers, we're leading the charge and leading the market. So it's not a stretch for us. It's actually, we are evolving with the industry, and we're very much where our customers need us to be.
Excellent. Once again, thank you so much for explaining that in detail. Earlier, you did, of course, mention NVIDIA, and you also, when talking IREN, you mentioned that, you'll continue to work with other. Now, of course, you have been leaning heavily into NVIDIA aligned infrastructure and of course the whole AI factory concept. Are you also open to work with other chip makers and integrate with the wider range of AI software, or you are going to focus more on NVIDIA?
Well, we focus on NVIDIA because NVIDIA has been 90+% of the market, right? That's where all the action is, and that's where most of the innovation has been, right? So we focused on that, but we haven't been, ultimately, we focus on the industry and our customers. Because NVIDIA doesn't pay our bills, our customers do, right? So we need to make our customers successful. As we're seeing our customers expand their GPU reach and all that, we've been already partnering with AMD, and you have seen some of the announcements. If you go to AMD website, they see that, we're supporting wide range of their chipsets with Cordant. There have been an announcement with Supermicro that we've been validated on their AMD chips, and we're working on some go-to-market arrangements that way. But beyond that, I think there is a bigger motion that's happening, and this is through the open source community. You might have seen NVIDIA open sourcing a large portion of their stack, starting from Nico infrastructure and all the way up to Lepton and Run AI and all that. That happened around March of this year. We've been very closely aligned with this whole open source motion, and we've been talking to the Linux Foundation, where it's very interesting that the folks who build OpenStack Foundation, with whom we've been on boards together and all that, now have merged into Linux Foundation. Jonathan is the chairman of CNCF now and all that. So it's kind of, everything is coming back, into one motion. So we have been working very closely with NVIDIA and the Linux Foundation to make sure that open sourcing is actually done in a way that it supports broader industry momentum. And in that, you will see more of this work happening, and this will also invite other players like AMD and other chip providers and networking providers and everything to be able to support that. Because again, in the end, we are in a supply constrained market, and what that means is every chip that NVIDIA makes will get sold. Every networking piece that NVIDIA makes will get sold. Right? The question is, same is true for AMD, by the way. There is no capacity that AMD has produced that is not being sold. And anytime soon, that's not going to change. What's going to happen is we need to create enough solutions, and hopefully it's going to be open source first, so that a customer, when they're able to get their arms and hands to whatever infrastructure is available, can have the software support that just works with everything. And we've seen how it's been done with OpenStack and how we did the hardware compatibility lists and how we worked with all the vendors. Similar motions are now being set up to enable the rest of the industry, because ultimately it's about the customer. It's not about the chip that they produced. And NVIDIA understands that, AMD understands that, and that's the whole motion that we're pioneering because of our open source pedigree and conviction.
Excellent. Once again, thank you for explaining that so beautifully. Of course, we talked about this earlier. You mentioned it briefly. I also want to talk a bit about open source, because you folks have a long and active history in the open source space. How does the IREN acquisition influence your open source work and strategy? And will you continue to engage with the community, or something might change there?
We will engage in the community a lot more. You will see us contribute a lot more. Again, our understanding from our partnership with IREN is exactly this, right? It's about removing friction and creating standards. And we have full support and full conviction from the IREN organization and founders directly, right? The challenge for a company like Mirantis, and one of the reasons we're not able to maybe contribute as much as we have in the past, is because we're a much smaller organization compared to Red Hat, for example, right? There are 6 billion, and we are little over 100 billion, kind of growing quickly. So to be able to kind of punch way above our weight, we had to have partners who have this belief. And in the first iteration of this thing, we had big support of Intel, who gave us a lot of money so we could actually contribute things under our name into the communities. So now we're having similar conversations with NVIDIA, who is looking to back us into those things. And then, of course, it does help to have a $20 billion business with tens of billions of dollars in the balance sheet behind us, so we can actually allocate some of that into creating an open source motion, and again, remove friction for the industry. And IREN will greatly benefit from that, because open source is good for a company like an IREN, because ultimately open source removes lock-in. And as a result, if you have a lock-in in the stack, and we've seen this with VMware, who just decided to raise prices 10x. So what happens when this happens is, if you run a workload and somebody in the middle with a proprietary lock-in puts in, takes all the margin, whatever is left is being essentially, the money is being taken out from anything underneath. So lock-in is good for people who build, is bad for people who build infrastructure. And IREN understands that. They're putting tens of billions of dollars into building the most efficient infrastructure. They don't want to have some proprietary actor just put a chokehold on the customer and say you can only have a percentage of that. That's not good for IREN. That's not good for the industry. So the conviction of open source stays, and infrastructure has always been the case where open source is actually a predominant player in infrastructure software. I don't think it's going to change.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us today to share the story behind this acquisition and share some details that people were not aware of. This is not about acquisition story. This, as you rightly mentioned, use your term, kind of merger, bring two forces together to solve a customer problem. It is not to solve a perfect space problem. So thank you for sharing that. And of course, those who are watching, first of all, you don't have to worry about this acquisition. You, as Alex mentioned, that you'll actually get more through this, not less. And you can, of course, go on and check Mirantis and IREN. And I look forward to chat with you again, Alex. Thank you.
My pleasure, Swapnil. Always a pleasure to talk to you.